Hey, what's up everyone? Welcome back, fellow YouTube viewers. Back for another video. This one I'm going to be answering a couple questions on my Boyd's fuel tank install. A lot of people have been asking, how do you wire it? How do you plumb it? So I'm gonna kind of do a basic on that. I'm not ready to do it on my own vehicle yet, so I'm just gonna kind of get into the basics of how it is done, how I've done it on previous vehicles, just to show you guys how to do it. And it's really not that difficult. It's actually really simple. So first of all, I'm gonna start with this. So this is the wire harness pigtail that I've got for the MU2101 fuel pump that goes into the Boyd's fuel tank. Now, first I want to say that on this pigtail, what I've done is, as you can see, there's two pieces of wiring missing right here. I've taken those two out, and that's for a specific purpose. If you remember from my previous video, with the fuel tank, you cannot use the sender on the MU2101 fuel pump. You can use it, but because of the height difference, you will get an inaccurate reading. So the best thing to do is use a Boyd's sending unit that you can get with the pump, and be sure to make sure you match the ohm rating with what gauge you're using, whether it's a 030, 090 ohm. Just make sure it matches, otherwise that won't read as well. So let's start with this. Let's get into this plug. This plug I got online, and you guys can get it anywhere from Rock Auto to eBay. There's a lot of sources you can get this plug. They're around $10 to $15. And again, so if I can zoom in on this so you can see, you got the 1, 2, 3, 4 pin. I've removed the 3 and 4 for the sending unit and left with the 1 and 2. The 1, obviously red for power, black for ground. The black you can ground anywhere. You can run it all the way up to your battery if you feel like it. What I like to do is run this black to a ground on the chassis, close to the pump, just so you have less wiring. The red wire will run all the way up to your wire harness, preferably a standalone like I run, and you will run this to the relay power that's fused off your ECM. So normally when you get an aftermarket standalone harness, the wires to wire stuff like this up are all marked, whether it's in a manual and it gives you a wire color, say large wire red for fuel pump, or it's actually physically marked. A lot of times they have a tag stuck to the wires on the harness. They're marked to the extras. All of your plugs that go to the motor, they're usually marked injector 1, injector 2, mass airflow sensor. They're usually marked, even though they only plug in one way, and usually it's self-explanatory, but also the accessories are marked as well. So either it being cooling fan 1, cooling fan 2, or say fuel pump, they're usually marked on the harness. And you will just run the power wire from that harness to this red wire on the fuel pump. It's that simple. And then the ground obviously just grounds wherever you feel like it. And as far as the wire harness that goes to the sending unit, again, the sending unit I use is the one that comes to the Boyd's tank that's separate from the fuel pump. That one goes to your gauge. In my case, it usually runs to a Dakota digital gauge, and that gauge cluster has a separate controller that looks like this. And that's where you run your wire that goes from the sending unit from the tank to that controller. So there you have it. It's that simple. You have 4 wires to the fuel tank. You have the 2 wires to the pump, 2 wires to the sender. 2 wires to the pump. You have the red wire that goes from the pump to the fused relay off your ECM, and then the ground wire. Then you have the sender, which the 2 wires in my case go to a Dakota digital controller, but you can also run those to most normal gauges that are running the same ohms as a sending unit. And that's it. As far as the fuel line itself goes, you can technically run a 3/8 line from the fuel pump directly to the fuel rail, because the pump is actually internally regulated for around 60 psi. What I personally like to do is I like to run a fuel filter from a 1999 to 2004 Corvette that has an internal regulator in the fuel filter that also has a return line. So on one side of the fuel filter, you have two lines, a 3/8 and 5/16, and on the other side, you have a 3/8 line. So on the one side with the two lines, you have a 3/8 line that feeds from the fuel tank to the filter, and then you have the return line that goes the 5/16 from the fuel filter back to the fuel tank, and then the fuel filter from the fuel filter to the engine is 3/8, and that's your main feed line. So essentially you have a semi-return fuel system that goes from the fuel tank, fuel pump, to the fuel filter, and then it returns excess pressure back to the pump, and then your 60 psi or roughly 60 psi regulated pressure from the filter to the motor. And that's it. I mean, that may have sounded overcomplicated, but that is how that I plumb and wire for LS1 swaps. And that's it. I mean, it's really that simple. You just have a couple wires that run power to the pump, and then you also have that couple of fuel feed lines, and then the one to the motor. So like always, I mean, I will answer comments in my feed. So if you guys have any questions, be more than happy to answer them. But I mean, it's really not that difficult. The main thing is if you have a standalone harness like I like to use, it's pretty simple because the ECM controls the power feed to the pump. So when you turn the key on, you have a 5-second power feed to the pump, and if the engine isn't running, then it kills that feed. So you don't have a safety issue where you have fuel constantly running if the engine's not running. So I'm not sure if that applies to newer ECMs, but for sure the earlier LS1 ECMs, it does. So that's it. Pretty simple process to run the power and ground and get your gauge working for your LS swap. Again, if you use different components than what I use, there might be a little bit of variations, but it's pretty simple. And usually with the components you buy, there's some pretty simple instructions that usually come with the stuff to help you along if it's different than from what I've done. So anyway, thanks again for watching, everyone. More videos to come. Till next time, see you later.